Welcome to Get the Elephants Out of the Room. I'm Chris Webber. We all have to deal with difficult people at work, difficult managers, difficult colleagues and difficult customers. In this podcast, we share stories and experiences of people like you who face these challenges and share their secrets to success. Our mission is to help everyone overcome obstacles and to become more confident, better communicators. So sit back and relax while we unravel the mysteries of another difficult person. In this episode, I want to talk about how your power of predicting the future needs to be your superpower, but also is how people are judging you. Because when we're doing meetings, when we're talking to customers and colleagues, we're all predicting the future. And that's often our discussion point. That's what we're trying to get to when we're having discussions about strategy in the future. Is who is right, who can predict the future. And I think that when you consider meetings through the lens of the ability to predict the future, it dramatically changes how you might behave during any discussion, how you might interpret what other people think, what they feel, what they say. When you think about the fact that actually we're all guessing, we're all predicting the future. Imagine how you would feel if you went to meet somebody who said, I'm going to tell you your fortune, I'm going to tell you the future. Some of us believe in these things, some of us less so. But if you think about your colleagues and your customers and your partners are trying to predict the future, then you might be a little bit more cynical, a little bit more suspicious than perhaps you would be previously. Now, let's ask the question, who do you think is best placed to guess what might happen in 6 months from today? We're all in charge of our own lives. We are the decision makers in our lives. And yet many of us find ourselves in places that we would not have predicted several years ago. Who would have known where you live, who your partners are, what job you have, what your favorite things are to do? We just don't predict that. We end up in these places. We make these decisions, but we are the product of a multitude of issues, influences, global colleagues, friends, partners, and we just can't predict where we might end up. And surprises happen. And let's be honest, they're not rare. Things happen every single day that we did not expect because the world contains so many variables that we simply cannot control. We can't foresee them. And we simply just cannot include all of these aspects, all of these variables in our assessments, in our predictions of what's going to happen and where we might be in the future. And I think it's for that reason that when we're talking to colleagues, friends, people at work, we look at trust as an important indicator of who we listen to during meetings, who we believe is the most credible when it comes to predicting what the future is. So let's analyze that for a second. We seek people who accept that there is uncertainty in the future and that they don't know everything. If we go to a meeting with someone who seems so confident that they know it all, that they understand everything, that makes us insecure. We want people to recognize that they don't have all the answers because we know that they don't have all the answers. So we're looking for someone who offers that, who gives us confidence, but not to the point where they are so self-assured that we feel, wait a minute, you must have missed something because no one is that confident of the future. We also want to listen to people who we believe who are simply not seeking their own personal gain. If we're trying to predict the future, we're trying to see what's going to happen, and we're getting advice, we're talking to someone else, if it becomes clear that that person is only interested in what they're going to win, what they're going to gain, and they do not care about you, that's worrying. Their recommendations, their suggestions, their predictions are going to be tainted for us because we feel like, yeah, it might be good for you, but is it good for me. So we want to hear that they have our interests in their thinking too. Then, of course, we want people who've experience and knowledge in the topic that we're discussing. They don't know anything about it, we're going to worry. So that's one element. Their credibility as an expert matters a lot to us. And we measure that based upon the past. Have they demonstrated that credibility to a good level in the past? So are they reliable, that what they said comes true, that they work hard to make things come true? But none of these aspects, much as we'd love them to be, guarantee accurate predictions. Just because someone who's been right before doesn't mean that they're going to be right in the future. Times change, variables shift, and let's be honest, the past is not the future. Let's consider an example for a second. Traders, bank traders, they earn money for their banks, and the banks earn money based upon guessing what the price or value of an asset will be in the future. Their whole business model is to buy an asset today with the hope and expectation that when they sell it in the future, it will be worth more than they've paid for it today. And so these people are incredibly smart. They build highly complicated mathematical models that incorporate dozens and dozens of variables, as many as they can possibly think of and consider. They input data and they use these models to estimate future value based upon small changes of those variables. So they start to assess what would happen if, and what would happen if this, and what would happen if that happened. And they put all of these issues into a spreadsheet, into a calculator, and they try and work out what is going to happen to the value. They then start to think about which of these things are more likely to happen. And then from all of that data, all of that insight, they start to predict at what value does that asset look like it's going to offer good opportunities. But all of this is based upon guesses and estimates. It is based upon history. It's based on the past and how things have happened in the past. And it's not the future. It's a calculated risk assessment. And let's be honest, banks around the world pay huge sums of money to these people who can successfully predict value in the future. But even the best traders make mistakes, and they fail to predict changes that could tank the value of their assets. There are many stories of traders who've lost millions and tens of millions, maybe even hundreds of millions in value in days and weeks because something changed that they just didn't predict. And so even more complex algorithms are used. Banks are using systems, computerized systems, to make these calculations, to include more and more and more variables into the calculations. But even these complex and advanced models are not perfect. They don't get it right. If they did, then we'd all be rich and wealthy, but we're not. And so if you start to think about all of the amount of investment, money, time, energy that goes into predicting the future, incorporating variables, assessing value, and then thinking about what's going to happen, and they can't get it right, then how can we apply those thinking and their logic to meetings that we have with colleagues and customers? We're not able to use those mathematical models. And in fact, for many of us, we're not even thinking about the fact that we are trying to predict the future. We are influencing each other to predict the future. So what are the lessons? I think there are four things that I reflect on when I start thinking about this idea of predicting the future and the lessons. And I think they're these. Experience matters because it informs common trends, reactions, and behaviors. So when we're considering how customers might react to a decision, a price change, something new in the marketplace, then looking back at similar situations is definitely going to be a useful indicator of what to expect. We look at what happened before, we see how people behaved, and we start to think, well, people follow patterns. It's likely that those things could happen again. But they're not 100% certain because things do change. But looking back at the patterns is a great place to start to learn those lessons. And that brings me to the second point, which is that I think lessons are more important than experience. Too many of us look at what happened in the past and we choose stories and examples that suit us instead of really learning the lessons. Instead of thinking to ourselves, 100 times that this happened, what happened the majority of times? We pick one that suits us, suits our narrative, and that's the one we pick out of. What I would like to encourage is for us to really reflect on what's happened in the past and learn lessons. History doesn't give us templates to copy. What it does do is provide us with examples that we can learn from and then apply to current situations. I'm someone that enjoys history and reading history and listening to stories from the past. And there are countless examples of medieval battles and historical moments where kings, queens, and generals take decisions that were unexpected or unorthodox. And these surprises were the catalyst for success. One of the powers that Napoleon had when he was marching across Europe was the ability to do things that nobody expected. He was fighting battles in different ways. And it was when people worked out what his tactics were that he started to meet his matches on the battlefield. But his unorthodoxy was what gave him power. And what that means is that people just looked at the past and said, this is how battles are fought, this is how people behave, this is what we do. They're making mistakes. You've also got to be open for the unexpected and thinking about when unexpected things have happened, what can we learn? The third point that I have is that any suggestion that comes from a colleague or a customer comes with a personal agenda. Meetings are full of people who are trying to prove something. They're trying to protect themselves from decisions that make them look bad. Any prediction that they have for the future is going to be tainted by messages that they want other people to remember. They want others to see them as conservative and safe, or creative and a risk taker. They want to see them as aligned with senior people, a challenger, an innovator, a leader, stuff like that. Customers will give us information that suits them, that protects their interests, and sellers will want to share information that encourages customers to buy. We need to be aware of the politics and the politics of the discussion in order to view the options through the right lens. When people bring us ideas, they're bringing ideas based upon what they want to happen in the future, what suits them, what suits their agenda. And as a result of that, we need to be careful of listening to people and believing that they're coming to this with a completely neutral view and completely neutral lessons. And then the final point I want to make on these lessons is that all perspectives matter. It's very easy to dismiss certain points of view because they're unorthodox or because they come from someone with little experience or less experience than we would like, or because they seem to be from outside our normal realm. You've got to remember that the future is unseen, but it is a product of what's happening right now, and it's shaped by what's happening at the moment. And as we get older, we get a broader view of experience, but we also lose perspective because we take for granted various different rules. These are the way things are. And as generations emerge and the world evolves, these basic rules change. I think back to my childhood and news stories of what was acceptable, what was judged, what was negative. Those things are not the same today that they were back in the 1980s, 1990s. Rules and expectations of behavior, language, and culture, they're not static. They evolve and they change based upon the moment in time. And these are critical drivers in predicting how people will act in the future and how people who are connected to these trends or who see the world from a different point of view can offer a valuable commentary on how things would be reacted. I saw a cartoon recently which really struck me, which was that I grew up in a time where we bought music CDs and we made cassette tapes of our music. We bought music and then it was ours. Now that doesn't exist. We rent music. We pay monthly to listen to music, and it raises the question of the fact that we don't own music anymore. We rent it. So if we stop paying our subscriptions, we stop getting access to our favorite songs. And the cartoon was picking on this and referencing a generation of people today who think that's crazy to rent music. Why don't we just buy it? Why don't we own that music? That's a backward looking, in many ways, backward looking view of what we're doing. We've moved to subscription models. We've moved to subscription models because it suits companies who want us to rent the music and not to own it. But when you start to think about the future and future behaviors, it's going to be tainted by people who ask the question, why don't I own my music? I want to. And yet for me, it was something that used to happen and we don't do it anymore. I think that's interesting. And it's a good example of how different perspectives influence decision making. I watched a TED talk recently, and the TED talk was talking about predictions and how predictions need to be treated with care because predictions at an individual level, they're biased, but also they're influential. The speaker started by sharing an example of people with a vested interest in the implementation of AI. She talked about tech companies and technology leaders who confidently predict that these AI tools will come to dominate every single part of our lives. Now, this prediction might be true, but it's also tainted, she said, because they want it to happen. It will help them enrich themselves. And the fact that they predict it becomes a powerful influencer on how we decide to engage or disengage with tools. Part of our decision to engage with tools is because we're hearing from people who are experts that they're going to become everywhere. And so they start to bend the future towards something that might be predicted. So what, raises the question of what might happen if we believed something different might happen than what people predict. And I think that's a powerful insight. Something we need to understand here is that agendas when we're in meetings with customers are tainted. We claim to know how decisions will land, which strategies are going to work, how prices and how product positions will be accepted by customers and by consumers, and how changes are going to be implemented. All the relationships that we have, our level of confidence, our level of trust, and our trust in the views of the other people that we are meeting carry a lot of weight. And how much attention we pay to their ideas, and when we're in agreement, then we now have a stake in making predictions come true. If we've agreed something about the future, how something's going to be launched, a strategy we're going to choose, we're now part of making that future come true. And so what we've got to start to think about is what's the agenda going on? We are not just discussing an opinion and an idea. We are discussing the future. And once we've agreed to it, we have a stake in making that future come true, because the next meeting we have with them, at some point, they're going to be reflecting on the decisions that we made, the recommendations that we made in a previous meeting, and how good were we at predicting the future. And so we create a cycle for ourselves that we then need to engage on. I think it's an interesting way to think about how we predict the future. And it comes back to the idea that your judgment, or how others judge you, is on your ability to forecast the future, which means that you also have a stake in making that future come true. Thanks for listening. I hope you took away some useful insights. Join us again next time when we unpick the behaviours of more difficult people. Until then, take care and see you soon.